You're listening to Robin Flan's Drummer Interviews, the #1 drum radio show in all of Los Angeles,
the world, the galaxy.
Hello, this is Robin Flans with Robin Flans Drummer Interviews, and I'm sitting here with my producer and co-host, Ed Eblin.
And under-the-board technician, too, yeah.
And our guest today crashed onto the drum industry scene many years ago. He made a big splash. He enjoyed a great ride with the world-famous Zildjian Cymbal Company. Now he's drumming up new business. Please give a tip of your hi-hat to John DeChristopher. John!
Yay, John.
Oh, what an intro. Wow.
You wouldn't believe how much we paid for that.
You had to pay something for that because that was pretty darn good.
Yeah, right.
Welcome to the show, John, and it is such a pleasure. And, you know, as I was thinking about talking to you, it just occurred to me, you know, I have known you forever and ever, and I have no clue how you got started in this wacky business. And so I'm sure that, you know, a lot of people who really don't know you too terribly well know either. So I want to know the backstory here. What got you into this business? I mean, was it music or business?
Oh, it was absolutely music. And it was, I wonder if maybe I pissed somebody off a long time ago and
punishment?
And they put a curse on me. No, I'm kidding. I started, I think like a lot of people, and, you know, kind of in the drum industry especially, because I think it used to be, and probably still is for the most part, but certainly when I started out, it was drummers working in the drum industry. Like when I think back to guys like Steve Edelson, you know, God rest his soul, and great guy, and you know, guys like Rick Drum and Jim Catalano, and you know, those guys are a few years ahead of me, but you know, they were all professional drummers at some level and really good drummers that kind of segued into the music, into the business side of it. And I started playing drums when I was 12, and I can elaborate more on that later, but I mean, I played in bands all through junior high and high school and afterward, and I didn't end up going to college. I actually went to Berkeley just very briefly, but I ended up getting a job at a music store in Boston. And that was probably the beginning of the business side from the standpoint of meeting a lot of people that would become important people later on in my life. But I was only 19 when I started working there, and still playing around Boston and professionally. And I got to a point where in 1985, I had just gotten married, and I decided I wanted to move to Los Angeles to pursue, you know, music in a more serious way, and that was the place to be. And I'm sort of skipping around here, but during those years I think it'll make sense when I get to the end of it. But during that time that I worked at Wurlitzer, there was many people that I met, including my future father-in-law, Vic Firth, which, you know, we used to laugh about that I was this, you know, kind of snot-nosed punk kid behind the drum counter that would later marry his daughter, you know, poor Vic. But
now see, wait a minute, that is a piece I didn't realize.
I didn't know if you knew that. Yeah, but
I didn't.
And that's a whole other story. But I'll just tell you, in 1982, while working at Wurlitzer, and Wurlitzer Music, I'll just say it's no longer there, but at the time, it was the full-on music store in Boston. It was like a smaller version of Manny's. It had that kind of vibe. It was, you know, musicians that worked there, a lot of people that played at night that, you know, really knew the stuff, and it was a really relaxed, non-pressure situation. It wasn't guys in ties with name badges trying to sell you stuff. It was, you know, real musicians and the Cars, who had a recording studio across the street, used to come in all the time and buy their equipment, and the guys in Aerosmith and the Jay Giles band. And, this was the late 70s, early 80s.
It was a hang.
Boston.
Yeah.
It was the hang. It was the spot, and a lot of great drummers in town and a lot of great friends. So in 1982, Simmons had introduced the SDS-5, which was the first kind of electronic drum set that they made. And they'd been selling these drums in England, and they sort of made their way over to the States. And there was a guy named Glenn Thomas, and Ed, you might know.
Of course.
Do you remember Glenn? You know Glenn, okay.
Of course.
So Glenn, we bought a kit COD at Wurlitzer, and the deal was that Glenn would come in and demonstrate it, do basically a clinic, and help us sell the kit. And it was an expensive electronic drum set back in those days, $2,500. So fast forward to the time that then Glenn comes in, and it's, I think, September of 1982, and we set the kit up, and we probably had like 30 or 40 people come to the clinic that night, one of whom was David Robinson of the Cars, who was playing like Sim drums and Snare and, you know, kind of what was available at that time. And he was watching very intently with his drum tech. And the next day, and after that clinic, Glenn and I went out and had a couple of beers and really just sort of hit it off. He was a great guy, and we really connected. And the next day, David came back with his drum tech, and we fiddled around with it for about an hour in the drum shop. And I was trying to remember all the things that Glenn had showed me. And, you know, I was like a fish out of water with this thing. But ultimately, you know, they left, and David's tech came back a little later and said, you know, we want to take it. Can you know, put it on our account, and I'll pack it up and take it. So we sold that kit, and I'm making this long story longer.
No, I'm interested. I'm hearing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, this was sort of the beginning, and we sold that kit, and I want to say this later that day or maybe the next day, Glenn called me. I think he was in New York, you know, sort of continuing his little tour, and he said, I heard the Cars bought the SDS-5. Are you ready to order another one? And you know, he was a good salesman, and I think we did. And that began this relationship between he and I, and we were the first store in Boston to be selling these drums, and it went on. And of course, during that time, that company really started to make a lot of headway in the industry, and then they kind of took off. And so in 85, when I was looking to move to LA, I called Glenn, and I said, I'm thinking about moving out there, and I don't want to just go out there and think I'm going to be the next, you know, Jeff Porcaro or Vinnie Colaiuta. I want to see if I can get a job. And, you know, he completely understood. He said, well, you know, if you come out here, I'll find something for you. You know, I'll figure something out. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. So I kind of filed it away. And then about a month or two later, I was really made the decision. I'd made my mind up. I'm going to do this. And I called him again, and he said, look, I'm serious. If you come out, you've got a job here. Don't worry about it. You know, I can't really tell you what it's going to be, but I was 24 years old, and I wasn't looking for an executive position in the company. I wanted something that I knew that I'd have some money coming in while I was out there trying to play. Yeah. So I literally got out there and went to see him the next day, and he wanted me to start the day after that. And I said, well, I might need just a couple of more days to sort of settle in here. And he said, fine, okay, let's have you start on Monday. And I started the following Monday, and I was sort of given a bunch of different things to do. I worked sort of as a product specialist from the standpoint of I knew the product pretty well, so I could talk to people on the phone and talk them through problems they were having. And I did artist relations, which I totally didn't expect, but it was just like, you know, we've got Chad Wackerman's coming in at 10 o'clock, and he needs to get this, he's having this problem, or, you know, can you work with him and spend some time with him? And it just sort of evolved from that. And then eventually there was an opening in the sales department, and he said, you know, this is really where you should be, because that's your background. So, and that was fine. I was making more money at that point doing that, and that was fine with me. And so that was the beginning of it. And I stayed there about a year and a few months. And during that time, I had met Don Lombardi, who, you know, we just sort of hit it off. I think I met him at a drum clinic at West LA Music or someplace like that. And had been using DW pedals for many years, and he called me one night and said, I'm looking to. This was right about this time 30 years ago. It was in the fall of 1986, and he said, I'm looking to we make drums, but only a few people actually know that and use them, but we want to become a serious drum company, and we're looking to launch them in January of 87 at the NAMM show, and we need someone who can do sales and artist relations, and your name came up, and is it something you'd be interested in? And to be honest, at that time, things at Simmons had sort of cooled off a little bit. It
right.
was the business was changing, and
Sure.
and we were expecting our first child, my son, who was born out there, and so I went up and met with Don, and I saw the operation, and I think I met John Good for the first time, in that visit. And John was just sort of part-time during that time. He was still on the road with, he was like the, in-demand drum tech in L.A. He was working for Jonathan Moffett and Chad Wackerman and people like that. So John had to make that commitment, too, that he was going to be there full-time making drums. So I took the job with Drum Workshop, and I started in, I want to say around November of 86, and we launched the drums in January of 87, and I was there until I started working for Zildjian in 1989. So that was, I was at Zildjian, almost 24 years, so it sort of, I won't say overshadows, but it,
wow.
I know a lot of people
kinda.
don't realize that I worked, that I had two other jobs in the industry prior to that.
Interesting.
That were
I
significant.
didn't. I didn't. I think I vaguely knew about DW, but I didn't know about Simmons, and so who nabbed you at Zildjian?
Well, what I did, Robin, was I'd been living out in L.A. As I said, my son was born in May of 87. And we'd been there at that point 2 years. And after about another year of living out there after he was born, it just didn't feel, we were going back and forth all the time and to see family. And it just felt like we wanted to be back on the East Coast. So made the decision to move back east at the end of 1988. And I made this arrangement. Don and I had this arrangement where I was going to be his East Coast office and, sort of artist relations person. So I was working from home back here, and I was attending the NAMM show in January of 89. And I happened to walk by the Zildjian booth, and I went over to say hello to Lenny DiMuzio and some other people that I knew there, and Colin Schofield, who I think you might remember.
Of course.
Yeah. I knew Colin he was living in L.A. for a short while I was living out there, and then he ended up moving back east to work for Zildjian. But we bumped into each other a few times in L.A. when we both lived out there, and he said, I heard you're living back in Boston now. I said, yeah, I moved back a few months ago, and I'm still with DW, but I'm sort of independent. I'm selling a few other lines that don't compete or conflict. And he said, well, we're actually looking to expand, and you'd be somebody we'd like to talk to. Would you be interested in coming down to meet with us? And I sort of pressed him on what it was, and he said, well, it'd be better to just talk about it, in person if you can come down. So, he asked for a resume, which I had with me, and so I got a call probably a week or two later, and I went down and met with him and a couple other people, and I grew up, 30 miles north of where the Zildjian factory is, but had never been there.
Huh.
And, which is kind of funny. But I took a tour of the factory, and I met some people, and I liked what I saw. And then I got an idea of what the job was going to be. And I was definitely interested. And at the same time, I had been contacted by, a company called HSS, which was the distributor for Sabian and Sonar.
Wow.
Back in those days. And they were looking for and so at that point, Zildjian had said, we're looking, Lenny's going to be kind of moving more toward education and focusing more on that. We'll need someone to kind of come in and another body, as it were, for artist relations. And Colin knew that I had these other jobs, so he knew that I knew a lot of these guys already, and it would be more of an easier fit, so to speak. So that seemed interesting. But, at the same time, Robin, I was looking at it like I'd already invested a couple of years into DW, and the drums were actually starting to sell and take off, and
oh boy,
and I was getting a commission. So I was, I was starting to make some pretty good money. And as great as it would be to work for Zildjian, I wasn't going to just, sort of jump at that and lose money either.
Right.
So basically, I sort of said, okay, I'm interested. They want me to come back another time to. I think what Colin said at that point is, we'll probably want you to come back when Armin's here to meet with Armin Zildjian. So, that was a good sign. And at the same time, I was talking to these people at HSS who were based in Virginia, and the sales manager was planning a trip up to Boston to interview some candidates. And he said, your name's been thrown into the hat. Would you be, I understand you rep DW. And I said, yep. And he said, would you be interested in talking to us? And I said, well, I would be, sure, but I do, I do have DW. And he said, well, yeah, we have Stoner, so you'd have to resign the DW line. And I said, well, I don't know about that. Stoner makes great drums, but I've invested a lot of time already and sort of, my life into this. And he's like, yeah, but you'll have Sabian, and you'll be making money selling Sabian, and you'll be making money selling Stoner. And so we sort of just put that on hold until he was going to be up in the next couple of weeks to actually, I wasn't presuming that I'd even get the job.
Right.
I was just, sort of feeling him out and letting him know that I wasn't excited about giving up the DW line. So I actually confided in Don Lombardi, and I said, because I knew Don was a good enough friend and I could tell him kind of what was going on.
Right.
And he said, well, look, I'll call this guy and tell him I have no problem with you selling DW. If you're going to be selling Stoner, I don't see there being a conflict there. They're drum companies, but they're not the same, and which I really appreciated.
Right.
And then during that period of time, I got called back down for the second interview with Armin, and that was like a real sort of magical experience. As you know from knowing Armin. I mean, I sitting in his office, and he's just this amazingly wonderful, charismatic man, that just was making me laugh, and he was making me feel really relaxed. And I was definitely nervous. And Lenny was in there too, who I knew. And I think Lenny had sort of given Armin the thumbs up and said, he's a good guy, Armin. He's going to be okay.
Right.
So we're chatting about drummers, and he's asking me, do you know Peter Erskine? Do you know Louis Belson, and Steve Gadd? And so we're just shooting the breeze, and Craigie, his daughter,
right,
who later became my boss,
right,
was the human resources person, and she's sort of sitting there looking at my resume, and I could see she'd like circled things in red and was making notes, and
yeah,
and that's okay. That's her job. That's
a little intimidating, but yeah.
and so she said, well, I have a question. She said, I see that you've moved around quite a bit. You were living, in Boston, and you moved out to Los Angeles, and then you worked for one place, and then you went to go work for DW, and then you moved back here. And yeah, so, it was an honest, fair question.
Right.
She said, how do we know you're not going to, in a year or two, just move on to somewhere else? And I said, no, that's a reasonable question. And my son was born in LA, and we moved back here, and this is where we want to be. And I have every reason to think that Zildjian would be a place I'd want to be at for a very long time, and which was an honest answer for me. And
yes.
And at that point, Armin said, Craigie, for crying out loud, I like this guy. Just hire him and give him whatever he wants.
I love it. Well, that's perfect. That's perfect.
That was Armin. I mean, and God bless him, man. He was so good to me, but so good to everybody. Anyone that crossed paths with Armin was just treated specially.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Well, you know what? We're gonna take a break, but and come back and talk about your life at Zildjian but in fact, before that, I want to welcome a new subscriber to the show, Chris Topple, and special shout outs to Joe, Kelly, Philip, Tim, and Solomon. and we're going to take that pause for the cause and be right back.
If you could design your own drum practice pad, what would it feel like? At ePad, our EnduraFlex practice surface was perfected to eliminate extreme bounce and unrealistic rebound. The benefits of ePad include quiet playing surface and shock-resistant properties that help reduce the risk of stress-related injuries. ePad offers the perfect feel and energy return for developing speed, endurance, and control. You will meet the challenge of the weaker hand with ePad. Warm up with our knee pads, tabletop practice pads. Warming up on ePads provides a natural transition from practice pad to drum set. At ePad, we know the need for speed, control, and endurance. Get your chops together with ePad's EnduraFlex playing surface. Practicing with ePads builds your finger, wrist, and forearm strength and helps you gain better control and endurance. Into feel? Well, ePads replicate the response and feel of a real drum. Our Pro Deluxe knee pad is portable, convenient, and lightweight. Perfect for the beginner, intermediate, or pro touring drummers. Find out why our products are a must-have. ePad, your source for high-quality drum set, practice pads, and accessories.
Hi, this is Robin Flans from Robin Flans Drummer Interviews. Please be sure to check out robinflansdrummerinterviews.com, where you can find some of my classic interviews such as Jeff Porcaro, Vinnie Colaiuta, Ringo Starr, and Carlos Vega, and many, many more. Again, that's robinflansdrummerinterviews.com.
You're listening to Robin Flans Drummer Interviews on Spreaker.com.
Hey everyone, I hope you will check out those interviews. You're going to find that it's a whole different experience to hear your heroes talk and laugh instead of reading words in black and white. It's really a neat thing. So, John, let's talk about the Zildjian years for a minute. I mean, more than a minute. You helped bring Zildjian into the foreground. I mean, I really do have to sort of give you that. And some of that was, the people that you were signing and bringing the products into the foreground. And, I mean, I'm sure that listeners would like to know how someone qualified for an endorsement.
Well, I thought you might ask that question, in fact. I was thinking about that this morning. I was out for my run, and I was just sort of thinking about it. By the way, I just have to tell you, I've had listened to a couple of the interviews before, and then just very recently, again, when you asked me to do this, which I thank you again for, I listened to Jim Keltner's, which I thought was great. I'd heard Rick's, and I listened to Rick's again, which I thought was great. My good buddy Rick Murata.
How many times did he pay for Rick's dinner?
Ed wants to know how many times you did pay for Rick's dinner. Yeah, but I'm cutting you off.
That's another story, and that's a long running joke between Rick and Harry McCarthy and myself. But with endorsements, I think in general, whether it's Zildjian or any company, I think the whole criteria. There used to be a pretty consistent criteria for all the companies, and when I was at Zildjian, it might have varied slightly from what maybe Sabian or Paiste or the drum companies even were looking for. But for the most part, we were all kind of on the same page with what we were looking for. And I'll say personally speaking that first and foremost, it was always about, that person's ability on the instrument, and that's something that I got from Armand, from Lenny DiMuzio.
Right.
Certainly there has to be a level of exposure. That's very important.
Right.
But the great thing I think about, I look at the people that, when I came into Zildjian in 1989, the people that Lenny had already signed, that sort of generation before me, like the Steve Smiths and the Vinnie Colaiutas and the Steve Gads and Peter Erskines and Dennis Chambers. I mean, all those guys. They were all just phenomenal players who, we didn't have social media, we didn't have the internet back then.
Right.
And you knew about these guys from records, and you knew about them from being on tour with, Peter was the drummer with Weather Report and a million other bands. And, but, first and foremost, it was about these guys are great players. And now, it is very different. And I won't lie to you. I mean, one of the things that made me realize I kind of needed to just take a break from doing that job was just how people started to look at that, and it became more about the exposure and more about the
how many Twitter followers somebody had. No, I get it. And sometimes it can be very, kind of disheartening. I mean, I know people who have lost gigs because somebody had more Twitter followers than they had when they were a better player than they were. I mean, seriously. I mean, it gets to be a social media contest, and it does get disheartening. The business is in a different place.
Exactly, Robin. And not to sound critical, but the problem with it too is that there are people in positions in companies that are maybe a little higher in rank, so to speak, that are the ones that are sort of setting this criteria, and they just don't get it. They don't, because I know people that still work in the industry that do artist relations for companies are frustrated by it. They're frustrated by the fact that their company recognizes someone with more Twitter followers as a better representative of the company than someone who's a really great, musician, proficient.
Yes. No,
so,
I know, and there are people that do that at big TV shows and big, rather than getting the best talent, they want the most social media. It's very disheartening. It's extremely disheartening, as opposed to, or the people, or bands, hiring musicians for bands. I mean, it's extremely disheartening. So so I can understand why it would be disheartening for somebody in your position to feel cornered, I think, or
Yeah, I just kind of like I almost felt like, it's I've had a really good run at this, and it's things are changing to a point now where I would get up every day and do the job because I loved it. Mm-hmm. And it's that old cliche of if you love it, it's not work. And I'm not afraid of work. I'm certainly not afraid to work, but it just became a sort of a situation where I felt like I couldn't really do my best work. And I didn't want to just come in and collect a paycheck every day and just go through the motions. That would never sit right with me, because I'm being very sincere about that. I always felt very passionate about what I did, and I just felt like it's probably better for me to just for just a number of other reasons too, to just sort of move on here,
Sure. And I'm sure by the same token, for you, it might have been difficult, knowing your passion for music, to really appreciate somebody's talent and know that you couldn't give them the deal that you wanted to give them because they didn't have the profile that needed to happen along with
and even exactly, and even in situations where we had people on board that just could have used a little bit of a push, and maybe they didn't have, they'd been with the company for a number of years and things had sort of slowed down with your career, but they could use a little bit of a push in one direction or another. And it used to be I had enough sort of juice and enough, muscle that I could do that. But those things were becoming sort of, more difficult and untenable in terms of like
Well, the
being
economy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just all those things that created that perfect storm. And
Sure. I get it. So then let's talk about the more fun stuff.
Exactly.
The more the heroes that you might have enjoyed along the way. I mean, I know there are so many stories, John, that I know you being you, and of course me being me, all the amazing fun, the Ringos and the Charlie Watts, and what was it like the first time you ever met Ringo Starr?
Oh man, I remember it perfectly clearly, and it was relative to how long I'd worked at Zildjian. It was a few years into that time. I mean, in other words, I started there in '89. I didn't meet him until 1995. I had a couple of close calls or near misses, as I say, but it was 1995, and he had come through town with the All-Star Band, and I'd met Zach, his son, a few years before that. And the long story short is we'd found these old cymbals in the vault downstairs made in the 40s, and I knew that Ringo and I knew that Charlie loved these old Zildjian cymbals. These were never played. Ed, you'd go out of your mind if you saw these cymbals. They were just perfectly pristine. I think in some cases they didn't even have the stamp. They were made, I think, during World War II, and they were put kind of stashed away somewhere. And so anyway, I arranged with Jeff Jonas, Ringo's tech, to, I wanted to present them to him, and Craigie Zildjian came along to present them to Ringo. So we did that, and Ringo then proceeded to take me up behind his drum set to show me at that time the cymbals that he had, which were a lot of his old cymbals. And nowadays with the All-Star Band, he uses pretty much all new stuff, but he was still using an old, I can remember, I have pictures, but he had a set of old 14-inch hi-hats. He had two, I believe, 20-inch, probably like crash rats, as one in the crash position, one in the ride position, and then some newer, I think a newer crash. But he took me up behind the kit and he said, "These two cymbals," and you know that voice of his.
Yes.
You know him very well, Rob.
Yeah.
"These two cymbals are from the mid-1960s." And I said, "Wow!" And I hit them, and they were really light and thin and lush-sounding A's. They sounded great. And he said, "And the hi-hats are from 1960." And I said, "So these hi-hats were used?" And he went, "They're on all the records."
Oh my God!
I felt my knees buckle. I felt my knees like.
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
And since that time, he's just been so great when I get to see him when they come through town. But that first time is etched in my brain forever.
Yeah.
There was it was just so magical, And one of the cymbals that we brought that night is 16. He put it on his finger and he heard it and he said, "Oh, this sounds fantastic," or "This sounds lovely. I want this on the kit." And he handed it to Jeff. And Jeff actually had to drill the center hole because it was on those old cymbals. You might remember they were really, really small.
Wow.
And it didn't fit his stand. And I kind of said, well, it might not be a good idea to play that. I was thinking he'd maybe just want to put it away somewhere. But he did play it. And Jeff told me a couple of weeks later that he finally managed to convince Ringo to put it away, like that he was going to crack it. So, and he did. So he's got it somewhere, but
that's really funny.
only Jeff really could be the one to persuade Ringo to not do that. But he really dug it. But I remember this was about 2010. It was right before his 70th birthday. They played here in town, and I brought with me some Tiffany cufflinks, like peace sign cufflinks that I wanted to give to him. So now Greg's in the band, Greg Bissonette,
right.
And I'm there for sound check, and I'm standing behind Greg and Ringo's showing Greg the intro to Come Together, and it was this again surreal moment. And Greg's going, "Oh, okay, so it's this way," and Ringo's going, "You've got to do it this way," and he's playing "Come Together," and I'm going, "Oh my God!"
Oh.
And Greg's looking over his shoulder at me, laughing, thinking like, I knew Greg was thinking what I was thinking. He knew that I was thinking what he was thinking. He's going, "Can you believe this?" Because Greg and I've known Greg longer than anybody. And we used to talk about Ringo, like,
Yep.
you know.
Yep. That's
so,
the same with me.
So
yep.
So Ringo leaves, and Greg and I are, chatting away, shooting the shit, and talking to Jeff Jonas. And then Donnie Whiteman, the production guy, comes out and says, he wants to see you. And I thought he's pointing to Jeff, and he said, "No, you," meaning me.
Oh,
so
my
I
God.
go back there, and I go in his dressing room, and I brought a couple of T-shirts, and he said, "Well, you're looking very well, John. You look very fit, and you look like you've got a nice tan." And I said, "Well, yeah, I live near the beach. I've been, the weather's been great. I've been getting a lot of sun." And I said, "Oh, I saw Zach about a month or so ago at Albert Hall," and he said, "Oh, was he doing Quadrophenia?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "He sounded great." He said, "That's really, really hard, that show." And I said, "Oh, yeah, he's,
Yeah.
I said something like, I said, "Yeah, he did a great job." And he said, "He's the best," or something like that.
Aww.
And I said, "Well, you're pretty good too." He said, "Like father, like son." It was just like comedy bit, He was sort of like smirking as he was saying it, And oh, it's hilarious. And meanwhile, Rob Shanahan is just snapping these pictures.
Oh my God.
Throughout the whole thing. So there's a couple of pictures that I got of me handing him the Tiffany box, the blue Tiffany box, and he's holding that. And then of course, there's one with his arm around me and the peace sign, and yeah, I mean, it's
priceless.
It's unbelievable.
Moments
it really
in
is.
our lives.
But it's amazing. I got to give a shout out. Bill Gibson, my buddy from Huey Lewis and the News, just texted me and he's listening. So I got to give Bill a shout out because I can't not do this and talk about how
Bill
much I enjoy
Gibson.
working with
Hi,
him.
Bill Gibson. I'm impressed.
Hi, yeah.
I know Bill Gibson.
We all know Bill Gibson.
We all know Bill Gibson.
It's one of those weird things to say because I say, Bill's an underrated drummer, and that's probably not even true because any drummer knows how great he is. So it's probably inaccurate to say he's underrated.
He's a great drummer.
He's so great.
He's an absolutely terrific drummer. Yes, I agree.
He is. He's rock solid, and he's one of those guys that, he's got all these chops that he just kind of keeps them in his back pocket for just when he needs them. Like he'll, out of nowhere, he'll do something and go, "Oh my God, he just played something that sounded like Steve Gadd," or, someone that you'd associate with having like crazy, and then he's right back playing this solid groove that, that the whole band can depend on. And he's a great singer and a really, really great guy.
Well,
so hi, Bill.
Well, those are the best drummers. I mean, and who have those chops, but don't, that just use them at those very special moments. I mean, and I mean, most of the drummers that we know have the ability to do whatever, but they don't. And
that's right.
And that's the story. I mean, that's the whole story. And Jeff could have done whatever, but he just chose to lay it down and be simple and groove, and that was it.
Jeff was, he was absolutely. I mean, I sadly I didn't know him real well, but I had the great honor and pleasure of meeting him a few times, and he, better than anybody how humble he was, and what a monster drummer. I mean, just a guy that had, like you say, I mean, he just had all that, ability that he only used it if he ever needed to. But it was, people think of him as this unbelievable groove, solid pocket guy. But man, when he wanted to just let loose and explode, he had all that stuff right there ready to go.
Absolutely. Well, we're gonna talk some more after we take just a short break.
Okay, you got it.
The LA Studio Drummers Roundtable 4-CD set, over 3.5 hours worth of audio interview, features Jeff Porcaro, Jim Keltner, Vinnie Colaiuta, Harvey Mason, Mike Baird, Steve Schaefer, and Denny Fongheiser, recorded back in 1991 with Robin Flans. And this is an incredible gift to give any drummer, and it's one that they can enjoy over and over and over again. So if you've ever wondered what you should give a drummer for the holidays or for their birthday or just to give them something that they'd really appreciate, this is the gift for them and for you to get them. LA Studio Drummers Roundtable at robinflansdrummerinterviews.com. Thank you for listening to www.spreaker.com/RFDI. If you happen to miss any of the live recordings that we do with our guests, then you can absolutely go to the site and pick up and listen to any of the interviews that Robin has done and play them for your friends, play them for yourself, share them with your friends and family. It's all about you. It's on your schedule. So if you miss a live show, no problem. You'll be able to pick up that same interview on demand on the website anytime you want. Spreaker.com/RFDI.
So,
You're listening to Robin Flans, the First Lady of Drummer Interviews.
we're back with John.
All right.
And so more highlights,
Okay.
John.
Well, you mentioned Charlie Watts too, and
Yes.
anybody who gets within probably 1,000 miles of my Facebook page can probably get an idea of how I feel about Charlie. He's my all-time favorite. I mean, the Rolling Stones are my favorite band, and that was, I look at them as the first band that sort of really influenced my wanting to be a drummer. My sister used to play the records when I was 12 years old, and she had a huge influence on my music, and she's 5 years older than me, and so she was like 17 and already listening to all this great music from that time. And this was like 1972. So anyway, that was a band that really sort of, and Charlie was a key guy in sort of forming my drum vocabulary early on. And so to meet him when I did, whenever that was, 25 years later or so, and the relationship I have with him is even, I can't even explain it. I mean, and I say this really as humbly as I possibly can, but I mean, it's not like Ringo, where I see Ringo at a show and he's very nice and he takes time to say hello and ask me how I'm doing. But Charlie is like, he's not quite to the level of Rick Marotta or Steve Gadd or Danny Serafin or somebody like that. But I mean, he's a really good friend. I mean,
I know. I see that.
It's pretty crazy. He invited me. They played this private show last week for the owner of the New England Patriots, and it was a kind of a secret thing right up until about a day or two before, and I certainly didn't expect to be invited to it. I was just hoping to see him while he was in Boston, maybe have lunch or something, or a coffee. And he called and he said, will you be coming alone, or will Kelly be joining you? And I said,
oh God.
Oh. I said, I didn't know I'd be coming at all. But, it was last Tuesday, which is the day we babysit our granddaughter, Fiona, who I have to give a shout out to because I know she's listening.
I know she's the love of your life. I know.
She sure is. So Kelly opted to, she said, you go, we'll take separate cars to go see Fiona, and then you can go on to see the Stones, and I'll stay with Fiona, and then I'll go home. So, but he's just this. We're sitting in his dressing room, minutes before, they're going to go on stage, and he's asking me about my band and how I'm enjoying playing again, and that's really great, and thinking about vintage drums and vintage cymbals. And every time I spend time like that with him, like I saw him last summer when I saw them up in Buffalo, and we were sitting in his dressing room for an hour, and I was picking his brain because I was really at that point buying all these old vintage cymbals, trying to get all these different sounds, and at the risk of being, just a major pain in the ass to him, I'm like, but Charlie, what was the cymbal that you were using in 1969 on the Let It Bleed record? And he's like, John, honestly, I don't remember. I just don't remember, I think it. So anyway, I got a little bit more information the other night when I saw him. He said, one of the cymbals I used a long time ago was a Zin, which I never knew he used. And that was a British made. I think it was made by Premier or something, and it was meant to look like an old Zildjian, but it was. Some of them sounded really good. Ed, I don't know if you've heard of these cymbals, but Ringo used one of the early Beatles records. I think Keltner has it now, and
yeah, years ago, actually, I think I had one, and I don't know if it came from my high school, but I do remember the Zinn cymbals.
Yeah, they're kind of an odd bird. There's some that are really good, or like good, or really good, and then others that are just plain awful. And he described the one that he had as sort of mediocre, but I'm pretty sure it's the cymbal that you hear on like Painted Black, that crash cymbal.
Wow.
That real, yeah. I mean, that's the way he described it. It was his crash, and he said, something like, eventually they all go, and then you've got to find another one, and so but so those, it's just funny to be sitting there, and I'm like going, yeah, but what about what was the ride you were using? He's like, I don't remember. It might have been in a Vetus. It might have been a Paiste. I don't remember.
Wow.
So but that's just it. I mean, I could spend 5 hours just going on about that, which I promise you I won't do.
No, but I mean, it's an amazing thing when that kind of level of thing happens in your life. I mean, you just pinch yourself and wonder, I mean, you just pinch yourself. It's just a phenomenal feeling to know that you arrived at that kind of. You've arrived. I mean, wow.
Yeah, I know. I never took any of that for granted either. I mean, I was always very protective of that with both of those guys, and even with Mitch Mitchell. God bless him, and even guys like Steve and when I say protective, I mean just knowing how. I'll use Charlie and Ringo as an example of how they portray themselves, and they're not people that, as you well know, they're not drummers that want to be like in company advertisements. They're the sort of antithesis of that whole wanting to promote themselves, and
right.
And there were times when I'd get a little bit of pressure, from within to let's see if we can get Charlie to do this ad or get Ringo to do this ad, and
right.
And I would, if it seemed like it would be the right situation, I might propose the idea. And we did actually get Charlie and Ringo at different times to be in some things, but I just know that they're very pure about how they represent themselves out there and how they portray themselves, and so I would be the sort of internal line of defense in terms of protecting these guys, and I embrace that role, and
right.
I will tell you, neither of those drummers that I mentioned ever actually signed an actual contract
Wow.
with Zildjian. So Ringo, since the '89 All-Star Band, has had a relationship with Zildjian. I mean, he never really had, even during the Beatles days, he bought a few Zildjian cymbals at Manny's Music, and he played some Paistes early on, as Jim Keltner likes to remind me when I see him. Ringo used to play Paiste. I said, I know, Jim, I know. But I love Jim. I love him. And because I know he has a couple of Ringos. And Ringo said to me one time, he said, he said something. I brought him a ride cymbal that he was looking to replace this ride, and he was like, yeah, this sounds okay. He said, I used to have this really nice paste cymbal, really, really nice. And it was one of the old 602s, and they are really nice, those old 602s.
Yeah.
But in the case of Charlie, he uses a UFIT China. He uses with a logo on it. He uses a flat ride that's made by an Italian company that I think is affiliated to UFIT in Italy, and some old Zildjian hi-hats from the 60s, and a crash cymbal that I gave him just before I left the company, one of the 16-inch A Zildjian CIE cymbals. But he's doesn't ask for anything, and he actually uses a Crash of Doom that Vince Wilburn gave him also. But my point being that he's not someone that's there isn't this reciprocal thing to where he's calling up every month and meeting lots of stuff.
Right,
so therefore,
right.
it would make sense to put him in advertising.
Right.
It tended to be one-sided. Yeah.
Right.
So.
Right. Right. I get it. And and you want to protect that. I mean, I wonder. Well, it's really not fair to ask. You know what? I mean, when you left the company, I mean, it kind of. I mean, it. You know, I mean, sometimes companies are all about relationships too. So that's kind of. I mean.
Yeah.
You know.
Well. Yeah, I mean, that comes with it. I understand that, and I certainly did everything I could prior to leaving to try to make sure things were solid with a lot of these guys, and I didn't want to, you know, a couple of people that I brought into the company sort of ended up leaving after I left, and that's, I think that happens. It's expected.
Sure.
It's not something I wanted to see happen, but it's
right.
What I appreciated and a few of those instances was them contacting me and saying, almost like they just wanted to not get my blessing. That's the wrong word, but just say, I just want to let you know I'm doing this, and I appreciate everything you did for me while you were there, and it's you know, but now I just don't want you to think poorly of me. And I'll tell you, one of the guys that actually called me was Jason Bonham, and we, you know, Jason and I got to be really, really tight, and he went through a lot, and I was kind of there with him when he got his life back together. I remember him when he got through with rehab. I saw him in L.A. at the House of Blues at one of those Guitar Center drum-offs, and he said, we were sitting there judging, he said, listen, man, I just want to tell you that I'll never forget that you stuck with me. You know, a lot of people, you know, kind of bailed on me, and you know, I'll never forget that. And that really made me feel good. And you know,
sure. Well, that's an important thing too. But now you are back to playing music, and
I'm having the best time of my life, Robin. Let me tell you. Can I go on about that for a minute?
Yes, you may.
All right. Well, because it does segue over to that. And so I left Zildjian in 2013, and I just sort of took some time to just, you know, have fun. And Kelly and I did a lot of traveling, and I got a phone call, or I got a maybe a Facebook message from an old buddy of mine, Neil Porter, who I met as a kid, 15 years old. The first band I played in, called Trigger, he was a friend of the band. He wasn't in the band, but he was a friend that was always at our gigs and hanging out. And the band that I was in at the time, the other guys were Mike McKee, Frank Husser, and David Kilty. And we were like this kind of cool little hotshot teenage rock band that played, you know, Aerosmith and Jay Giles and all those songs, Alice Cooper. And anyway, so it's 2014, and Neil says, we need a drummer for this gig that's coming up in a couple of months. Could you play with us? And I hadn't been playing. I was just starting to sort of go, okay, I got to put my money where my mouth is. And now that I'm not working, I've got this time now. I got to really start playing my drums again, because I hadn't played in a long time and I sucked, as anyone would tell you. So Neil reaches out and he's like, oh, it'll be great. I'm like, well, you know, I haven't played, Neil. I don't think I can do this. And he's like, no. And he was really persistent about it. So then he emails me a set list, a song list, and I'm looking at all these songs, and it's like 20 of them are like Beatles songs, and there's a bunch of Rolling Stones and Who.
Wow.
I'm going, oh my God, this is like my dream song list.
Yeah.
These are like my favorite songs. So I said, okay, this is going to be good. It's going to kick my ass. So I said I'd do it, and I started practicing every day, and I'm like a kid, like I'm in my drum room 3-4 hours a day some days, and just playing along, and I'm talking to guys like Steve Gadd and Rick Marotta about it, and you know, Rick's first impression is like, Jesus, you really need the money that bad? You're gonna do it? And I'm, you know, it's just, I'm like, no, Rick, I want to play. And he, I forget what he said, but it was a typical Rick answer. It was kind of like, boy, you got nothing better to do. Must be nice, you know. And
do you know?
One day,
can I say something? Do you know, if the drumming thing doesn't work out, you can do impressions.
Well, I'm around these guys so much. I probably, Rick especially. I know. Oh boy.
Yeah, Go ahead.
But and one day I'm just sort of complaining about it to Steve, and he said, "How's it going? Did you play today?" I said, "Yeah, I played a couple hours." I said, "Man, this is taking longer than I thought. Well, what's the problem?" And he's like, "Well, what's the matter?" I said, "Well, it's just that, I can't. I guess I'm just trying to find a shortcut where I can get back whatever little bit of technique I ever had." And he's like what? I said, "Well, like trying to play something fast." And he's like, it was perfect, Steve Gadd. He's like, he wouldn't let up. He's like, "Why do you want to play fast?" I said, "Well, what songs do you have to play fast on?" I said, "Well, there really aren't any songs." I said, "But I would just be, so you just want to be able to play fast. Why do you think you need to play fast?" And he totally like knocked me down, 3 places. I said, he's like, "Listen, man, forget that fast shit, okay? You don't need that shit. Just concentrate in the groove. Just play the groove. Who gives a fuck about that? You think people give a shit about that? They don't." Let me tell you. And I'm like, okay, all right. And he's absolutely right. And
absolutely.
I knew he was right, but that was a real wake up call to just go, look, it just, the guys in my band aren't expecting me, I don't think anyway, to play fast. They want me to have it feel good. And so anyway, long story short is I did this one gig with them in October of 2014, and we had like one rehearsal before, and it felt so great. We did the gig, and it was great. And I kind of, from that point on, I muscled my way into the band. They probably didn't really want me, but they kind of were stuck with me from that point on. So.
Hey, John, I'm sorry,
yeah.
my mic is out on this board for some silly reason here, but I just wanted to make a commentary that I actually watched you play on your Facebook page it's, I guess, some club in Massachusetts. I don't know how long ago this was, but I will tell you the one thing I was really blown away by was how relaxed your grip, your whole approach is very comfortable, very fluid. Doesn't look like you were straining or trying to, hit some sort of a, subsonic level to get out over the band. It just sounded great, but it looked really relaxed, and because of that, obviously sounded really relaxed. So. Yeah, forget the fast stuff. You sound great.
Thank you.
Don't worry about it.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'll say, this is one of those things. Again, I could probably go on and on about or elaborate on, but I think the great thing about being older now and doing this is I can totally look at things differently, and that's a great example to me. Is like I'm not playing hard anymore. I'm playing lighter, and I look at guys like Jeff, for example. Who certainly didn't hit hard. He didn't hit super, super light, but it wasn't like he was trying to overpower the band with his backbeat. He was able to play with great finesse. And, Rick actually hits pretty hard, but he still has this ability to have all this finesse and this control when he plays. He's got a very, he's got a great motion when you see him play. And the same with Steve Gadd, and all these guys that I've been fortunate to be around, and then there's the other side of that with Peter Erskine. When you look at the way he approaches playing just the ride cymbal, it's you couldn't be any more relaxed. But I was just going to say that the benefit of now, even like listening to these songs at age 55 versus 15, I'm hearing them differently and I'm hearing them correctly. And with that, I'm more critical of myself. But the cool thing I think is I've come to this band now, and we just do this for fun, obviously. But I feel like I'm playing the parts more accurately, so that it complements the music better. That I can, I'm kind of hearing the little nuanced thing that Ringo's doing with the hi-hat more than I was back then. I might have just thought he was playing just these bashing straight eighth notes in the hi-hat, but actually, it's got more of a shuffle thing to it than I realized. And,
interesting.
Those kinds of things.
Interesting.
And yeah, it's that kind of stuff. And I'm just way more focused now on the time and making it feel good. And all the guys in the band actually, I'm pretty lucky because they all have really good time, because there are some songs that, like Neil, for example, will start just on the acoustic guitar. He'll just start it himself. And I'll hit my little metronome on my iPad. And if it's like 118 beats per minute, and he's usually like right on the money without even looking at it. I won't count it in. He'll just start strumming it. And I'll just hit it so that I know when I come in, I'm going to be able to keep it where it should be. And he's usually like right on the money. And the same with the other guys too.
Nice.
They've been doing this a long time. They're great musicians.
Nice. Well, I'm so happy for you. That's and you still haven't let go of all your amazing contacts, because I know that they won't let go of you. Some of them have convinced you to manage them. So tell us a little bit about that situation.
Well, I think it was Michael Corleone that said it best. Just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in.
So what's the story?
All right, so I'll give you. I promise I'll try to make this quick. It was. I'd stayed in touch with all the guys after I left, certainly, and especially Steve and Rick and Peter and so Kelly and I were on this cruise. This was in 2014, and I remember this because we're in Budapest, and my phone rings, and it's Steve, and I said, "Oh, I got to take this. We've been playing phone tag. We had just got there." And I thought, this is going to be an expensive call. So where are you? I said, I'm in Budapest. What are you doing? Go through the whole thing. Oh, wow, great. He said, well, listen, and he had some questions about some clinics that he was being offered by some people in other countries, and how do I go about this, and how do I, how should I respond, and can you help me with this? And it turned into this conversation of like, well, man, I don't know what to do. When you were at Zildjian, you used to take care of this shit, and now I don't know what to do, and I don't want to just say no, I can't do it. I'd like to maybe put it off for when I can do it. So I said something to the effect of, I said, Steve, are you asking me to he had mentioned it sort of just in passing at one point, something about managing him. I said, Steve, are you asking me to manage you? And he said, now hold on a minute, just hold on. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Don't go putting words into my mouth. So it sort of became one of those sort of comedic moments, but it was decided that I would then represent him. So Peter then heard about that, and he said, what's this I hear about what you're doing with Steve? And I told him, he said, well, I really need someone that I can trust and I can rely on, because Peter is a great businessman, and he had, up till then, him and his wife Mitzi had been dealing with all his various things that he does, his business. And he said, I'd love to be able to just have you take a good chunk of that on, so that I can concentrate on other things, and I can take a little pressure off of Mitzi from having to deal with all that stuff. So I welcomed Peter into the fold, and then Rick, of course, got wind of it, and he said, wait a minute, hold it. I want in on this, and so I've got so many Rick stories. I could go on and on. So Rick Marotta became the third victim, and then in the last year or so, Danny and I had been in touch, and I just had explained to Danny I was probably at that point kind of maxed out with the number of guys that I felt like I really could sort of take on and manage effectively, and but Danny's one of my oldest and best friends.
How do you say no to Danny?
Exactly. No, I couldn't.
And gee, John, I need a manager.
I would manage in a minute. You kidding?
Oh, don't say that.
We got that on tape.
Yeah,
I think you to manage me, actually.
We got that on tape. No. I got that on the radio. Everybody's heard it. Okay.
We've got 2 book and movie deal offers since you've been on today.
All right. Hey, I was thinking, I think the first time we all met, I want to say, I was thinking about this today. I feel like we all had dinner together at a PASIC at Disneyland in like 1991. Does that sound right with the Modern Drummer people?
Oh, my God.
We sure did. I remember that, too.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And you know what I was thinking at the time, Robin, is like I'm sitting here having dinner with the person that interviewed Jeff Porcaro, Ringo Starr, Charlie Watts, Rick Marotta, all these famous drummers, and I'm like, wow, I'm having dinner with Robin Flange. This is so cool. And I still feel that way.
And I'm sitting here now thinking, wow, I'm talking to a guy who's like friends with these people. So, see, it all turns around, my friend. It all turns around.
I think we've all been pretty blessed, and
yeah,
it's pretty great. But I want to just I know we're probably running out of time, but
That's okay.
Two things that I think about Rick, and because I've joked around about it, but when we did this tribute to Steve Gadd in 2003, the Zildjian Drummers Achievement Awards, or American Drummers Achievement Awards, and Rick was really the first guy that I called to be part of the band to pay tribute, and Vinny was there too, and we ended up getting the James Taylor rhythm section and to play along. But Rick was really the man on the ground in LA that was like putting things together.
Yep.
And I just, there was this really, and it might not be as funny over the radio, but there was one day that he called me, and I remember it was the event took place in September, so that whole summer was just this crazy, stressful, trying to get all these things lined up. It was an incredible show to put on. Like Bill Cosby was the host. So I'm trying to organize a rehearsal at Center Staging with the band, with Rick and Vinny and all the guys on Steve's band. So Rick calls me one day and he says, I just answered him and I go, "Hey Rick, how's it going?" He said, he doesn't even say hi. He said, "I just want to tell you, if this wasn't for you or Zildjian or Steve, I would run away from this thing so fast. You have no idea. You have no idea how fast I would run away from this thing. What have you got me into?" And then it turned out it had to do with, I don't know, the cartage or getting the drums there. I don't know. And then it was fine. And he, of course, killed it.
It helps. It helps to have friends. It does. It does.
It does. Yeah. And he was hilarious. If you ever get to see the DVD,
I've watched. I've watched little snippets, but Rick is hilarious and one of my favorite people. So, yeah. I mean, we know some of the same favorite people, John, and you're one of my favorite people. And with that, I think we should close because it's going to become a mutual admiration society here real quick. You are indeed one of my favorite people. And
well, thank you, Robin. Likewise.
And I'm so happy that you're enjoying your life as much as I miss you on the ground. But I'm so happy that you're enjoying what you're doing. And thank you so much for being with us today, and thank everybody for tuning in, and I want everybody to check out my website at robinflansdrummerinterviews.com, where you can download audio interviews with some of the greatest drummers on the planet. Some of those we've talked about today, and please check out ePad practice pads at epadco.com, and if anybody has any questions about the show and our guests, please email us at info@robinflansdrummerinterviews.com. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And
where's John's next live playing?
And John, where are you playing live next so that somebody can go and see you?
Okay, we're playing next Thursday, the 10th of November, at a place called Red Heat Tavern in Wilmington, Massachusetts. It's an early show, 8 o'clock. And it's a great restaurant bar. We played there over the summer. It was a lot of fun. And a big shout-out to the guys in the band. I mentioned Neil Porter, but I want to mention Paul Gianelli and Paul Candelori, my other bandmates, in Grand Theft Audio. It's called Grand Theft Audio.
Oh yeah. And everybody check out John on Facebook, John DeChristopher, and check me out on Facebook, Robin Flans. And we will catch you next time, everybody, down the line. Big hand to John.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you,
It's been
John.
fun. Thank you.
And over and out.